Thank you, everyone who made it to the session towards the end of the day. I really appreciate it. Few disclaimers before I jump into the topic. This is the first time I'm giving this talk, so it's still coming together. But I always welcome people to, contribute to it and make it a conversation. That is always more fun that way. So if you have any questions, comments, then let me know. Raise hands and we will figure out how we can make sure that people who are watching the recording also get what you're saying. Also, I will not go deep into the legal things of legislations, but I still feel like I must mention that I don't have a legal background. So whatever I say, it's not legal advice by any means. And English is also my second language, so if something sounds odd, then it might not what I meant to say. Feel free to correct me at any point in time, because we're all here to get accurate information, and we're all learning all the time, and that includes me. So with that said, a little bit about me. I am Director of Community at the Open Infra Foundation, joined the foundation in 2016, almost 9 years ago now. And before then, I was working for Ericsson, which is a large telecommunications company. And actually, that's where I got in touch with open source, of all places, may or may not be expected. So I have some corporate experience with open source, and I also have a lot of open source experience with open source. I am currently a community manager for 2 projects called Starting X and Kata Containers. Happy to chat about that after the talk if you're interested. I'm also running a podcast on the side about what? Open source. It's called My Open Source Experience. Shamelessly plugging it in. Go check it out. As the title suggests, it's about people's experience in the open source ecosystem from community perspective, from corporate perspective, from all kinds of perspectives. And let me know if you like it or if you hate it. I'm interested in all kinds of feedback. And you can catch me in email, you can catch me on LinkedIn, many other social media platforms, and all other places that did not fit in here or on the slide. So wherever you can, just catch me whenever you can and have a conversation about open source. So, my talk today is tackling maintainer burnout. So what is burnout? Let's just set some foundations out there. I looked it up in the dictionary. What better place for a Hungarian to look at? So as you say, I underlined the one that really does apply to our interpretation of burnout, meaning physical or mental collapse caused by overwork or stress. Although I would say that bullet point number 1 and number 2 are pretty well applicable as well. Running out of fuel and feeling like your brain is on fire might be speaking from experience on that one. Also looked up some other places, what they say. I think this is the American Psychology Association. If I butcher the acronym, I'm sorry for the association. Someone will hopefully correct me in the comments or somewhere. So they're also saying a very similar thing, just elaborating on it a little bit more, that a person will experience burnout if they are exposed to high levels of stress in their professional environment. If we are talking about, professionally burnt out. Chronic stress for an extended period of time. And sometimes that chronic stress is not even that entirely, let's say, visible to you, which is why I included a third definition, interpretation, type of burnout, let's say, which is the caregiver burnout, which I think applies pretty closely to open source maintainers, because if you look at how the website is linked below, they describe caregiver burnout. It's physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that happens while you're taking care of someone else. Now, to me, someone else could be an open source community that you deeply do care about. Happened to me in the past. And when you are sort of in a caregiver position, you don't always recognize that you're not taking care of yourself enough. Anyone in the room experienced that besides me? Oh, lots of hands. So this is our contextual foundation for the talk in terms of how we are looking at what burnout is. Now, why does this happen? Why we are talking about maintainer burnout specifically in the open source space? Even today, I heard it quite a few times. Just in the hallway, people are mentioning maintainer burnout as a growing challenge. So I brought you some, community view and corporate view on what the challenges are. And the first bullet point that I put on the side is it is exactly that caregiver burnout type of challenge, is because when it comes to open source, one way to look at open source communities is that we have a group of people who are working together on a common goal. And people are usually very invested in that goal. Like, they do personally believe in it. It's not just like, it's my job, my company appointed me to this project, and I'm only here to do my job, and that's all, and otherwise I don't care. Most people do, especially if they put on a role that is a maintainer role, which, as the name suggests, you're there to really take care of the project. And that's when, personal time starts to get invested in the project if you're otherwise working on it as part of your job. But you could also be working on open source project as an individual because you're interested and you like the project, you believe in the mission, and you want to be part of it. And you start to make, sacrifices, evening work, weekends, and then just starts eating you up a little bit. And that's, when burnout starts to happen. And when it comes to, that smaller group of contributors who become maintainers, they have a very high pressure on them. And these days, in most open source projects where I participated in or worked with, I never really hear that, oh, hey, we have too many contributors. We don't need this many people to work on this project. Oh, we have too many people who do code reviews and patch reviews. Anyone heard that from? No? People are saying no and laughing. So there's contributor shortage and there's reviewer shortage. And you recognize that I called these two out on the slide specifically because every reviewer is a contributor, but not every contributor is doing that many reviews. And that increases the load on maintainers even further. And then there's, misaligned expectations, and what do I mean by that? Clear communication. I'm currently, and a few of my colleagues, community managers at the Open Infra Foundation. We are working with, our communities and trying to figure out how to resolve some bottlenecks and, make the maintainer experience much more enjoyable. And what we've been finding is that there's one thing that is becoming a big challenge these days, which is clear communication. I don't think anyone is really surprised about that, but what do I really mean by clear communication? Like, if you're working in a corporate environment, you have the out of office flag, you have that in your email, your colleagues will know when you go on vacation, or they actually at least have a way to figure it out that you are on vacation. But when it comes to open source projects, contributors don't really always announce that I won't be able to look at this patch for 2 weeks for whatever reason. So this will not move forward. Reviewers also don't always announce that I won't be able to look at this thing, even though I just added a comment that you need to fix this and this and that as soon as you can. That part is missing, and it's causing a lot of frustration because people are waiting around on each other and they don't really know if the contributor ran away or they are on vacation or what is happening, causing a lot of delays and a lot of frustration. And again, the frustration and the stress builds up. And then, we end on the maintainer shortage itself, because the maintainer role, it has responsibilities, it has a lot of tasks that, maintainers need to do, and they are always able to offload that to and delegate, share that responsibility with other people in the community. So small team keeps shrinking sometimes, and the load is just growing and growing, and that causes challenges. And all that stress and frustration and expectations on people, it just gets worse when you meet. There are people who are monitoring open source projects, but maybe haven't gotten a chance to get involved yet, and they have misconceptions like, there are maintainers to this project, and they work on this. They must be working on this project full time. Anyone met with that misconception before? I see some nods, yes. Or maintainers are the experts in every little piece of the code base. They must know, they are the maintainers. Now, we were running surveys with some of our projects, and projects with a large code base, like maintainers are struggling with, there were people added some new code, it's great, they walked away, and then now we don't have the bandwidth to understand that to the deepest level, so we're struggling with keeping up with code reviews in that area, and that is a challenge, and people don't realize that when they just drop code off, maintainers are the maintainers, so they'll figure it out, right? But they can't always do that. And if maintainers are called maintainers, then aren't they the ones who are just fixing everything and making sure that it's all, going to be sustainable, the code works well, bugs are fixed, it's their job, right? Well, no, it's not their job, but because, how the term suggests, people sometimes just assume that that's what maintainers do, again, full-time, even though they usually don't have full-time allocation, except very, very few examples. And what I mentioned before, contributors and reviewers, the overlap between those two groups is not 100%. So again, maintainers know the code base, so they are the ones who should review, every incoming change because they are the ones who know. However, I always like to challenge that one, like if no one else reviews the code, how they will learn. But again, the misconception often wins. And just a few things that add to all this that will lead us over to the corporate view a little bit is like, I'm a maintainer because my company told me so. Happened to anyone before? One. Awesome, I love that. Because in my experience, it's usually the opposite. You have to fight that this project is important to us, this project is important to me, and I have the opportunity to take on a leadership type of position, become a maintainer, and they are often told no, or they might do it anyway and take it on their personal time. Or, my manager told me that I have to do more code reviews in this project. That happened to anyone? One hand, sort of, and some laughter. Doesn't happen often either. So again, the investment in the open source projects is just not there, especially when someone is a newbie in a project. Like, do code reviews there? Somehow it's never a first priority, even though it would be helping the newbie and it would be helping, the community as well. And let me see, I'm rambling a lot, so I will move forward from this slide, but just think about these things a little bit. And now, corporate view, which more recently, there's a lot of buzz around metrics, community health. Is this community healthy? Which is great that we have data around this. But there's one thing that I often find missing is that companies do, risk assessment, like looking at open source projects. So is it sustainable? Like, does it have contributors? Is this a diverse community? Like how many contributors it has now? How has it been changing over time? And low contributor count and as well as low diversity. Just think about things like the XZ incident or event stream incident in the past. that can lead to, burnout maintainers. There's someone coming in saying that they're going to help, and then all of a sudden vulnerability ends up in the code, and it's intentional. And it is a big challenge. It is a problem. So, as companies are evaluating these projects, what I don't see happening is saying that, oh, here's this technology. We love this. We don't have to implement it ourselves. Maybe the project is not where we would like it to be in every aspect. Let's see how we can invest to get involved in it and, take on some of the responsibilities to make that project sustainable. And this also gets combined with the misconceptions within companies. They have their own internal structures. I've been through that with Ericsson. Oh, we've been doing things for 25 years, 50, 140. It's an old company. And it's great. However, if you start to rely on open source software and you say that, but our ways of working is how it's been and it must remain the same because that's the only thing we know, that doesn't work. And it didn't really work well. I can give you that, I think, without public shaming anybody. It didn't work. If you incorporate something new, you have to change and adapt how you are approaching things to be able to fully incorporate that new thing that you just decided to start to rely on. And companies saying, upstream development and maintenance work is more expensive, it's overhead, it's always overhead. Not exactly true, but I will come back to that later. And we picked this open source project, it's healthy, and it will remain healthy, so we can just use it. But if everyone thinks that way, how long will the project actually remain healthy, right? So think about this. There's that risk assessment. Oh, this project is not healthy, we're just walking away. And if everyone thinks that way, then how big does the pressure get on open source projects and open source maintainers? It's like guillotine hanging above your head, right? Like our contributor base is not where it should be, so the company walks away. But if the company walks away, where are we supposed to source those new contributors? Are we expecting, people in their free time to just come and pick up all the slack? Or are we expecting people in the companies who are already involved to work in their free time to pick up the slack? Just imagine that pressure. And then that is also the taker's mindset. Free as in beer? No, it's not. Like, we all understand that open source isn't free as in beer. But I do have the experience from companies actually not really meaning it. Does anyone in the room have that experience when someone says that, no, I understand what open source is all about. It's not free as in beer. And they don't. And people are nodding. So I'm not the only one with that experience either. And another pressure that I see happening, especially new contributors coming in, and I just contributed, I'm super excited, here's my patch, and then it doesn't get reviewed for a while. Well, the two reasons, the maintainer is busy, and others may or may not decide to review code. And then the new contributor gets disappointed, and then everyone is frustrated. So all these things are getting into that, pushing the maintainers into that burnout stage, because it creates a lot of pressure. And again, you care about these projects, especially if you were part of the group who created it, but even if you weren't, you care. And you want it to succeed, and you want it to be sustainable. And all these things for a maintainer and project leader can feel like failure. And it's really tiring, especially with projects with big load, a lot of incoming changes. people get really frustrated. Like we've been getting this feedback of we are not doing changes fast enough, we are not doing this fast enough, we are not doing that. People are, like they were joking, in one of the sub-project teams, they were joking about rage quitting 2 weeks ago because they've been having this feedback of, what you as a maintainer are not doing well enough. But then where is the involvement from those people who are frustrated and giving this feedback? Because it isn't always there. So a lot of pressure on people. Now, before I totally run out of time, legislations. Open source, if you attended the keynote this morning, $8.8 trillion, I think, is what it was valued this morning. Just imagine, yes, if you had to recreate all the open source code in proprietary software, how much money that would cost, how much duplication we would have on the market all over the place if everyone had to implement everything for themselves. So governments are realizing that code base, the majority of the code base is or depends on open source or both. Now, at the same time, modern life also heavily depends on digital infrastructure and digital products. I see laptops in people's hands, phones, smartwatch. This isn't one, by the way, but it is connected, though, to the internet through my phone. So we are doing more and more things, almost everything online. Shopping, banking, I see my money on a screen as a series of digits. It's not physical. So it is all that we do, all the connections that we have, most things that we own, it's prone to cyber attacks because we just live a life that is connected. We are living through the network these days, so we get attacked through the network as well more and more. There was an article someone circulated in one of the Slack channels about, I don't know how many billion accounts leaked, Apple accounts and account information, passwords, and all those things, and it happens. So governments are realizing that the digital space needs to be more secure, and they're starting to put legislations around it. And with that work, open source gets impacted either directly or indirectly or both. So just to mention some examples of governments getting closer to secure the digital space. There is an executive order from 2021, executive order number 14028. It is in the United States, improving the nation's cybersecurity. It is exactly what I was describing in the sense of wanting to protect against and respond to malicious cyber campaigns that affects countries at large and then goes down to the individual level. And what governments are starting to also recognize is that they need to create a space where companies and actors can share information, at least with the government, but then also with each other. And it was also, I think, one of the first legislative efforts that was pointing to open source through the context of you need to know what's in your product, what your product depends on. So this is where software bill of materials gets mentioned, or SBOMs, as we just refer to it these days. And they're also talking about things like zero trust architecture, multi-factor authentication. You probably know the drill. Need to secure the product, also need to secure and enhance the software supply chain security. So this is one of the older efforts, if that's a right way to put it. Getting late in the day, so I may not find the words as accurately as I should be. The next one I wanted to mention is the Securing OSS Act. It is only a bill in the United States, which, if I understand it correctly, that means draft legislation. But okay, people are nodding, so at least I'm not saying something completely stupid, which I'm happy about. Created in 2023, so it's roughly 2 years old. That one was focusing on open source. And what I wanted to highlight is like the way how it positions and understands open source and says things like fosters technology development, which is an integral part of overall cybersecurity. And I think this, fostering technology development and innovation and part of the foundation of digital infrastructure that promotes a free and open internet. I think all of us, I can probably speak for all of us who are at this conference, this is why we are here, because we're all invested in something like this. So this is draft legislation, but draft or not, it is something that was directly focusing on open source. Now, let's go over to the other side of the pond and look a little bit into the Cyber Resilience Act, which is a legislation that was approved, I think, in November 2024, but there you go, getting the nods, thank you, by the EU Commission, and it is part of the EU Commission product rules. It's not the only product rule, it's just one of them. And the Cyber Resilience Act, or CRA, or EU CRA, as people refer to it, it does not focus directly on open source, it focuses on the commercial software space, but it does focus on software that we all know is built on open source, and the EU Commission knows that too. So the CRA has been through quite a few iterations to make sure that open source is mentioned in a way that is more compatible with what open source is and how the open source ecosystem actually works, which has been really great to see. So if you attended FOSDEM and saw policy conversations and talks and discussions, there was a big chunk about the CRA, and it was amazing to see it happening. And what the CRA focuses on is products that are made available on the EU market. And if you are a company that is based elsewhere and you think that, oh, I'm good, if you make your product or service available on the EU market, the CRA still applies to it. It doesn't matter where you are. The only thing that matters is where your product is. And that makes probably way more products, the CRA applicable to way more products that some people might recognize. So I found that an important reminder to give. Now, I listed some of the roles that is in the CRA. You can see there's OSS stewards, which, for example, open source foundations fall into, but it doesn't have to be a foundation. So if there's a company who is supporting an open source project that they are not monetizing, they are not building a product or service on top of it, they can be open source stewards as well. So you don't have to be a foundation, but foundations are open source stewards. There are open source developers. Thankfully, they are the least affected by the CRA. There are manufacturers who are the most affected. And again, if you are creating a digital product that is made available on the EU market, then you are a manufacturer who is very impacted, and you bear the most you have the most responsibilities in the CRA. And then there's importer and distributor with moderate responsibilities. I will not even go into that. What I do really want to highlight about the CRA, though, is that it recognizes the importance of not just reporting vulnerabilities to the government and government agencies around the EU, but it also says that manufacturers are responsible to report the exploited vulnerabilities to the makers of the software component, and if the maker is an open source community, then to the open source community. And they are also, let's say, incentivized to provide a fix to the vulnerability if they have one. So they are kind of obligated to share that. It doesn't mean that that has to be the fix that they shared, but if they have a fix, they have to share that with the open source community as well. So this points towards involvement. Now, I'm a human being. I'm also Hungarian. We love backdoors. So I'm not saying that the CRA will just, in itself, all of a sudden, tomorrow, solve all our challenges and everybody will be an open source upstream contributor. But it does point towards, if you are relying on an open source project that becomes part of your product, you have responsibilities, and you have responsibilities towards the open source project as well. You can't just be a user and taker anymore, according to the EU Commission's new legislation. So what now? Well, I think this is where I should drop my little clip-on mic and walk away, because one thing that I do see very often is upstream work is secondary. Most often, it's not part of the product development and product maintenance workflow. It's like, once we release this product, then we will upstream these changes later. But we will just do it downstream first, because we know how to do that, we have control, and we just, I think today, one of the huge challenges is that most of the maintenance and production development work that touches open source happens in the wrong place. It happens downstream, and it has to happen upstream. That's kind of the point of the talk. I could walk away from here, but I'm not going to. So I understand that it's challenging, especially if you have a product service that depends on a lot of components. And then if you look at the dependency tree, which could be huge and deep, you can't just go and say that I'm going to invest headcount and money and hardware resources and everything into every single dependency that I have. I'm not saying that you need to do that. However, do you know what open source projects your products are relying on? Like, are you aware of the dependencies that you do rely on? And have you made the decision which one of those are strategic to you? And if you haven't, what is holding you back? Why haven't you done that yet? And if you haven't, I would urge you to do it, because that's where it starts. That's where you can start to decide which ones are the ones where you will start doing, not just throwing a bug fix or especially a feature on the community and then be frustrated that it doesn't get reviewed immediately and then walk away. But when will you pick up the tasks like doing the reviews yourself, like making all this work part of your production work, as opposed to having it as a second-class citizen? So start to work upstream in those critical strategic dependencies and components that are open source in your product. That is a starting point that at one point you will have to get there, because today you are only mandated to report exploited vulnerabilities. Tomorrow the legislation could cover more ground. So eventually you will have to get there. So why not start now? Investment. You can't support every project by getting involved, but some projects, they need some funding to be able to organize a gathering for the contributors, because if you don't meet in person, like at events like this one, collaborating is much harder. You don't have to be in the same room all the time, but if you're able to meet the other people, that just speeds up the development and maintenance work tremendously. It also helps with building trust with the people, especially new people who are joining your community. So some communities would benefit from monetary contributions. Money isn't always the solution, though. So look into the projects that are strategic enough to put some kind of investment into them and figure out what helps that community the most, so that you can chip in to make them be sustainable. And again, get involved, like do the code reviews. Code reviews are the best way to learn about a project. I know it from my personal experience. I used to be the crazy one who was even playing around with some submitted changes, like, let me remove the code change and see if the test cases that they did fail. And if they didn't fail, then what are they testing exactly? Because they are not testing the code change that you just added. It helps a lot with learning how the existing code base works and how the new changes that are coming in are affecting that code base, what the new functionality is, and it's kind of fun. So encourage people, encourage the employees, give them time and assign them time to be able to do those kind of things and chip into the maintenance work. It isn't just, submitting the bug fix and the feature that is important to me. Submit the things that is important to the project that will make sure that that code base remains solid, sustainable, and works well for the ecosystem that we all rely on. Open source communities, I think they heard this ad nauseum, but I will just repeat them. Accessibility, can people find your project? Can people find your communication channels? Can people talk to you? Are you approachable to newcomers? Or have you reached the level of frustration where you're just mean to everybody? I'm not saying for no good reason, but there is that point, that caregiver burnout when you're just so exhausted that you're not even recognizing that you're not approachable anymore to someone who's just new and coming in and trying to figure it out. So that is something that groups of people can look into and help each other and make sure that you get ready or you are ready for new people to join your community and come in and be part of it. Are you, how open is your community? Because, open source communities, the level of openness really varies. It could be the code base is open, and that is, open source license, OSI compliant open source license, the code is open, it's technically open source, but if the discussions are happening in private channels, private emails, it's not really open. It's not accessible for new people to join. And if you think that you have to maintain control, then please go and check out some of my podcast episodes because we cover a lot of ground on why that is an absolutely horrible idea and it's counterproductive to everyone, but I don't have time to cover that today. And then clear communication, I talked about that already. Tell people if you're not available for some time. Share with people what the priority currently is for the community. If they are not established contributors, even if they are casual contributors, they may not be always able to follow what your current priority is, what you're focusing on. Just tell them that we will get to this patch, we're focusing on this other big thing right now. You can help out with come and review that stuff, move it forward faster, and then we can together get to your stuff faster. But your project, your community has to be able to communicate these things to people who are incoming so that they know. Because you can't just assume that everyone just knows. Because there's so much information out there that we just can't keep up. I can't keep up. Maybe you all in the audience or on the other side of the camera you can, but I admit I can't. So sometimes I just need to be reminded to the thing for the 15th time. And I duly apologize when I do, but sometimes I just have to be. And then onboarding, which is something that could be looked, and it feels like an overhead on the community's end. It's like the upstream versus downstream work and the switch between the two. But it's an investment that is worthwhile. And it's not just about onboarding new contributors, that is a step, but often more frequent, but maybe still casual or just somewhat established contributors, they need a little bit of mentoring to get into those leadership roles that you would like to share the burden of with somebody. So think about those kind of mentorings as well. How can you mentor the next generation of leaders in your project and your community? And I have 1 minute to spare, so any questions or comments or conversations on camera and then off camera, now is welcome. I might have burnt people out. Did this talk resonate with you? Okay, people loved it. Anything that you disagreed with or didn't understand or didn't like? Anything that anything that most resonated with you, that you feel?
I feel like you spent a fair amount of the talk selling to us something we already understood, the burnout problem. And also the upcoming legislation could have been like boom, boom, boom. I really wanted to get to the punchline about how legislation is changing things. I think that's actually the most important part of the talk.
Okay.
And you think about how you compress down in time.
Yeah.
So I would compress the first part
Okay.
up a lot and get to the interesting parts and then explore the conversation because it's nuanced, it's messy. And
Oh, it is, yes.
so that's how I would sort of rethink it.
Awesome. So the comment was that I will take into the next iteration and version of this talk is to compress down the beginning and spend a bit more time on how we are utilizing or are going to utilize this newer wave of legislations that are putting some responsibilities on maintainers. So anyone who wants to have an ongoing conversation about that and wants to explore that, I would be happy to after the talk, not as part of this remaining minus 60 seconds, but afterwards, I mean, come find me after or just raise your hand and I will hunt you down. Because as the gentleman who just dropped the feedback and left, he's pointing towards that, you know, this is nuanced and messy and not clear, but there isn't a clear answer right now. This is something that from here we all need to figure out together, and I would love to chat with all of you who already invested 41 minutes of your life into listening to me to see how we together can make a change. And with that, thank you for your attention.